All right, so here we go. It's August 2023. I'm sitting here kind of a little bit in shock that I'm almost 70 years old. Never thought I'd get here. Kind of smiling. It's been an amazing ride. The idea behind this video was simply to clarify some basic ideas, terms, and roadblocks that I encountered when first stepping on to the path of religious ideas of India. Most specifically, Hinduism and Vedanta. Vedanta is a school or tradition, a path in Hinduism. If you decide to explore that area, maybe this will help. I suppose we all just have tons and tons of barriers and blocks, roadblocks. Otherwise, we'd all be spiritually free and totally happy and joyous and bliss. But we've got stuff. Life deals stuff against us. But I thought these were pretty funny. When I first started looking at this area of life, they were pretty big roadblocks. It was probably just my ego getting in the way, saying, no, they can't know it. I need to know it. What in the world does this mean? And we have so many preconceived ideas and barriers that I had a lot of protest, a lot of disbelief. But I suppose that's how it is with all religions and all spiritual practices. Let me also emphasize that I'm not trying to convert anyone or say that this is the path. It surely is not. I'm definitely not trying to convert anybody, and anybody who knows me knows that I think dogma is just not the way. To say that this is the only way and this is the only thing that's right is an absurdity to me. Each individual has to find out inside what communicates to them and what works for them. I'm going to communicate this later in this short video, but one of the great mantras, one of the things I read early on was the idea, I'll quote it, many paths, same truth, or another way to say it is many paths, same consciousness, or many paths, same God. You have to find out what works for you. And interestingly enough, almost all paths and religions have tremendous truth. I love them all. And I guess unless it's, they're all great. And so we have to find out what works, each of us individually. Jumping on somebody else's bandwagon, I don't think, boy, that can lead to some problems. Let's just put it that way. So it's your path only. The truth, truth be told, the truth is 100% in you. And it doesn't really work just to read. You can be all the scholar you want, but that doesn't mean you have personal realization. Enlightenment's going to come about through realization, and it's going to be personal. Books can give you maybe a kickstart. Maybe they can give you some ideas. I don't read that much anymore. Sometimes it's interesting. You probably think this is baloney, but I'll say it anyway. A lot of times I'll just think, maybe there's something I need to look at, and I'll just let the book open up. And sure enough, there's a concept, something that's very helpful right at that time. Sometimes I'll just be meditating, and then I'll have the realization, that's what they meant when I read that 2 years prior. So there's a lot of times when I read over the years that I just didn't really get what they were talking about. And of course, how could I? I wasn't ready for that truth, I guess is one way to say it. So a lot of times I'll just be meditating along and I'll say that's what was meant in the book, but that doesn't mean I was trying to have the book steer me in that direction. There was a point when I was meditating when I realized that being steered on somebody's path or steered in a direction isn't really helpful. You just want to sit there and be and meditate on certain, just be. I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to get into the methods of meditation on this video, but the truth will just come out. it's just all there. It's all within you. It will just come out. So let it be. I guess we're just taking the roadblocks and the protests away, and it'll all just come to you. So, and maybe that's the last little point, is the whole idea that realization is all that matters, and that's a personal realization. But if the books start you on your path, well, good deal. Good deal. So here's some roadblocks or some bumps in the road that I don't know if it's particular to Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, but they were pretty big, pretty major for me. But once I sorted them out, they became very important. So it's funny. As I was approaching these religions of India, I read something, and I don't even know if these are all the truth. This is just how I take these ideas and these truths. But I read quite a bit, and I searched what was the point of enlightenment that Buddha discovered. And I kept reading, he's not going to tell you. Sorry, it ain't happening. And the whole idea was that the path of discovery was part of the enlightenment, or that you needed to walk your own path. And that was part of the game, and that you can't become enlightened without doing that. God, that frustrated me. I just wanted the answer. Come on, just tell me. I can. It's like the government saying, well, anyway, I had to, I didn't like that. Maybe that's my ego. Come on. I can suck it up. I can deal with enlightenment. I'm sorry. I totally get what he meant. That in a way you could say you have to peel things off accordingly. You could say that you have to earn the right to be one with enlightenment, to be one with God, one with consciousness. It's a path. And if it was easy, we'd all just do it. But it's not. It takes work. I remember the great Saint Vivekananda saying, tons of people, many people meditate and practice religion, but very few are really on the path to enlightenment. I thought that was really, really fascinating. He just called a spade a spade. This is the way it is. So that was a roadblock. Another major roadblock, especially in reading these, and the books that I'm going to recommend, was the difference between, maybe I should say, who's the audience in the writings. Because a lot of times the words spoken are those of a great saint or an avatar or God, whatever you want to, wherever it's coming from. And they're communicating to disciples or to monks. And that's going to be very different, which took me a year or two to find out, very different than if they're communicating to what's in India called a householder. A householder is somebody that's got to live life. So when you have something like renunciate everything, give it all up, live in a loincloth or something like that, go beg. Well, that might, I don't even know exactly how it applies. I think I do now. But that's going to be different than if, and you even will hear that a householder, it's okay, go make money, take care of your family, have sex. Whereas the monk, that's a no-no. So that when I started reading, they didn't announce who the audience was. Were they speaking to a monk or a householder? How does this work? So I'd hear these or read these things. Don't eat this, don't do this. And it was a bit of a challenge because I was going, well, I'm not going to do that. This is ridiculous. I've got to feed my family. I've got to take care of people. I've got to fight sometimes. I've got to fight for what's right. And right now we're in the middle of that with this democracy versus dictatorship that's happening in America. So sometimes, you got to stand up. How does that fit? How does monks, for example, in the Ramakrishna order of Vedanta Hinduism, it's very clear. Keep government keep politics out of the picture. But as a householder, you might need to look at these things. You might need to defend your family. And so that was big. And once that sorted out, once I understood that, in fact, it's funny, I was talking to the Swami at the Vedanta Center, which I occasionally go to, and just a wonderful man. And we were chatting, and almost the first thing I brought up was this challenge between monk versus householder. And he just lit up and just the biggest smile, and he said, "Oh, it's just a big one." Now, he's a monk, so I'm sure he hears about this from the various devotees, parishioners, people that arrive at that monastery. It's a wonderful place to go, by the way, Vedanta of Sacramento. In fact, you can look it up online. So that was a big one. If you're reading these things, realize there's a different audience there and a different expectation for a monk or a householder. Another one that was really big, and I had to figure out how to apply this to my previous 30 years in what I call a religious cult now. It wasn't initially, but it actually came together in a beautiful way. But I kept reading over and over again as I Googled Buddhism and Hinduism that the first thing you needed to do was find a guru. And in fact, if you look at the music of the 60s and 70s, I mean, the guys in the Beatles, there were various people, the Beach Boys. There's so many people that went to India. Steve Jobs, who I went to high school with, went to India to find a guru because that's what you were supposed to do. That was a big challenge for me to understand that. I just simply did not want to do that. It actually takes it a little bit further in that, and I thought this was beautiful, that Vivekananda, again, the great saint of the late 1800s, said what you really need to do is you're young, you're getting on your path, and you find a guru and you do exactly what they say. Sorry, but you know what? In essence, that's what I did in my 20s or 30s. I found somebody. I basically did what they said. I worked in that group. That's very similar to finding a guru. Nowadays, they say you can kind of find a guru by going online. But in a way, I did it. But the great Vivekananda said eventually you start breaking away and saying, I have my own truth, or I'm going to adjust it this way. You might even found that, which I did, find out that guru is a false guru. It doesn't really matter in my mind whether it was false or not. You eventually have to break away on your own, and you start evolving your own path and philosophy. It might be a conglomerate of many. And he actually then says, so in the end, we're going to have billions and billions of religions because everybody has sorted out their own. I thought that was beautiful. So instead of disagreeing with or attacking with my initial experiences, I kind of look at it as an ashram and we were all just on a path. I just broke away. I don't have any negativity about it. I don't feel like I need to attack it or explain it. It's just what I did, and I find it similar to go find a guru. But if somebody said I needed to go find a guru now, I'd say, no, not a chance. So that was an interesting roadblock. I kind of read it a lot, and I disagreed with it, but that's because I'd already done it. Another big roadblock, if you're going to read Hinduism, is what's with all the gods. They've got millions of them. And I will tell you that I didn't get it, but I guess I did. But if you think about it, and I think Ramakrishna, the great avatar saint of the 1800s, explained it so beautifully. And he talked about it all really is just consciousness. But if somebody is taking a god, this is Sri Lakshmi, and is that any less important or silly? No. It's, if that's, I guess I'll just make it this simple. If that means purity, love, consciousness, good. If it's not any less consciousness than just pure consciousness, if that makes any... I'm just trying to communicate. If that's what works for you, good. Let's not make fun of it or silliness or act like we're above that. I think that's really, really important. And in fact, and I'll explain this a little bit later, the path to enlightenment, well, maybe I shouldn't get into that now, but there's many paths, and the easiest path is the path of worship and love. That's why Jesus Christ and Christianity grew so much. His path was really just pure love and pure simplicity. And that's what Ramakrishna also communicated. It's a beautiful thing. And that in fact, the path of knowledge, which was my initial path, is much harder. And ego gets in the way. It's just so easy to get stuck in self and ego, which is what I actually think happened with that initial religion that I was involved with. So anyway, I think it's really interesting. I actually embrace now all the various gods. The temple that I occasionally meditate at has 5 big images. They probably could have hundreds, but they have Lord Krishna and Lord Buddha and Lord Jesus and Lord Vivekananda and Lord Ramakrishna. I think that's great because each one provides something to each individual, and whatever works for you works for you. And so, but that whole idea of all the gods, Buddha says no God. There's no God. Well, I don't think that's actually what he meant. At the time of Buddha, it was a little bit like, from what I've read, Hinduism at that time had become very protected into these senior religious leaders, and that you had to go through them to find religion and spirituality. And Buddha said, no, it's all in self. The heck with this idea of protecting it through a god or something. So I think one has to sort out what these concepts mean. And I can only say what they mean to me and how they sort it out to me. And I don't even want to get into arguing it. I'm saying that these shouldn't be obstacles. They were for me, but they ended up being sources of great truth as they sorted out. So, which actually leads to the next big obstacle, which is this whole idea of God. If you read these various books from Hinduism, sometimes they use the word consciousness, sometimes they use the word oneness, sometimes they use the word God. I remember watching a video of George Harrison, who was Vedanta Hinduism. He passed these books out. So did Steve Jobs. That's what he studied, amongst other things. I just know this was part of it. I think it was the Ramakrishna and his disciples. Well, there it is. Both George Harrison and Steve Jobs passed out quite often. Anyway, these things just have to be sorted out in one's own time. But don't let them be obstacles. If you're reaching for a path and reaching for truth, just keep moving forward. I've read these books so many times. In the beginning, I must have skipped over 90% of it because I just went, what are you talking about? Is that real? Could this be? But in time, it all started to sort out, and it actually kind of melted into one. It just worked. So, yeah. So if I happen to use the word God or consciousness, oh yeah, I mentioned George Harrison. I thought it was kind of funny because he had the same roadblock. He was on a Johnny Carson interview, and he said, yeah, initially I couldn't even use the word God, but he says, now I just use it liberally. I know what it means for me, and it doesn't matter if somebody misunderstands. Oh, another little interesting thing is, please remember, and probably it applies to any religion, even Christianity, but most of the writings are ancient. And as such, you have to read it with that period of time and culture in mind. Things have changed. Things have changed just from when we were in college, Vietnam, and life has changed. Look how the internet has changed everything. So you have to bear that in mind when you're reading these things. I think the stories, especially that book, Ramakrishna as his disciples, you just get such a picture of India of the 1800s. Watch the movie Gandhi, which I think is the greatest movie ever made. You really get the story of the early 1900s and what was happening in India. And yeah, I don't even, was it Great Britain, or I don't even know what they were called at the time, but they ran India and had for 200 years. And that was a whole different culture and environment and what people had to deal with. So I think that's really important. So those are some of the obstacles and barriers. I would say if anybody is going to read, anybody will read these books or is going to explore things, just read it and see for yourself. Does it communicate for you? I have a good friend that Taoism communicates for her. I love that book. But I just also really love Vedanta Hinduism. But I will also say that I really don't want to identify with any particular religion. I love them all. And so sometimes it's Hinduism. Sometimes I look at Lord Buddha and go fabulous, or Lord Jesus. So there you have it. There's some other, which I've already kind of alluded to, some other basic terms and ideas that I thought were beautiful. And these came up early on and they really caught me. Which I don't know if it's specific to Hinduism, but I can say that I attribute it to Hinduism. And the first one might have been the first week I started reading, which was many paths, same God. Or many paths, same truth, many paths, same consciousness. I thought that was absolutely incredible. Find what works for you. And if you read these things, look at these things, meditate on these things, you'll find that truth is truth. Another way to view all this is many words, same truth, which is another saying or mantra in Hinduism. I have found that the real truth, the real fundamental of all religions is the same. So again, just find out what communicates for you, which is the second book. Might as well pull it out now, but I use this book to illustrate this idea. The Sermon on the Mount, according to Vedanta Hinduism. And that book is just incredible. First of all, it's written in the words, the authors were like 1950 to 1970, so it's very modernized. It's really easy to read. But the reason I bring this one up is that it brings up an idea, let's say, have humility, or learn forgiveness, these basic truths of the Sermon on the Mount by Lord Jesus. And what it does is then it says, here's what Ramakrishna had to say. This is what Vedanta, these are the words. And they're completely the same and completely different. But I can read the words of Ramakrishna. It's like a hot knife in butter, just whoosh. But for whatever reasons, the Christian words, and I think it has to do with the culture and the time, they don't sink in, but it's the same truth. So I end up loving both of them, but I like the words of Hinduism. Sometimes I like the words of Lord Buddha or Lord Jesus, but don't throw it away because the words don't work. The fact is, the Sermon on the Mount is also communicated, I suspect, in the Muslim faith. I know it is in the Taoist that I've read, and in Buddhism. I think these things, it's the same, many paths, same God, many words, same truth. And I think that's really, really important. I don't want to say that's bad over there, mine is the only path, I'm the only way you're going to arrive. No. I think, wasn't it, now I recall, didn't Steve Jobs give a talk at Stanford when he first made it in Apple? And he basically just stood there and said, dogma doesn't work. I think he also said, leave college and just go apply. I wonder what some of the Stanford people thought of that. But anyway, um, yeah. And I think the other thing I want to bring up, and I thought this was completely enlightening, I think it's specific to Hinduism, but again, I don't know if that's true, but this was really important to me. And I think I did a couple other videos where I didn't fully understand these paths, but they were explained in the books that I bring up here. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time with it, but suffice it to say that there are all of these various paths, and I guess you could say paths, billions of paths, but in Hinduism, there's these four very clearly defined paths. And what they are doing, here's another word, yoga. We think yoga means doing exercises. That's the westernized term. But it actually comes and is derived from the idea of to yoke. Like you have two cows that are yoked together. So yoga is from the word yoke, and it means how can you become one with consciousness, one with God? How can you be yoked together? How can one become one with God? Whatever that is, that's yoga. And there's four distinct paths of yoga. And I thought this was beautiful because just like there are many paths, everybody has a different character. And to say that everybody has to do it this way is just, I guess I shouldn't say dead wrong, not workable. So some people, boy, this almost makes me weep because that idea that everybody has to do it this way, it's just going to leave people dead in the road. It just can't work. Some people are very into knowledge, introspection, and that's great. I would say they probably might do better with what's called jnana yoga. It's the path of knowledge. Some people are very active in there. It's very much into work, and that's actually called karma yoga. How one, through work and effort and having their attention also on consciousness, God, you have to sort that out, what it means. I'm not going to get into that, but that's called karma yoga, and you can become enlightened just with that path. You probably need to use some of all paths, but that's my take. There's Raja Yoga, which is the path of meditation. All of these will have meditation, but that's like a distinct path of meditation, which I've never studied. I don't even want to get into what that means. I suspect a lot of people have an idea of India's yogis practicing Raja Yoga, but I'm not sure of that. Being able to control all aspects of the body and all aspects of things through meditation, I suspect. But I love karma yoga, the idea that through working and effort, there's actually a path there. And the idea of jnana yoga, exploring all aspects of separating out, of all knowledge and separating out the physical universe from spirituality. And what does that all mean? But what I learned in Hinduism and from Ramakrishna is, and it's really the path of Christianity, and that's bhakti yoga. And I've learned to love it. Absolutely love bhakti yoga. And you know what's interesting is it took me a couple of years, but I have learned that this is the best, or the best for me, the easiest path. And that's what Ramakrishna taught. The other paths are fantastic, but boy, do they have some barriers. They have some bumps in the road that are hard to overcome. Jnana yoga ego can just overtake you. Look at me, look at what I know, look at what I've done. Bhakti yoga is more just the pure love, pure caringness. I think it's marvelous. The idea that you can, and it's easier, and that you can become enlightened and free. But it took me a long time of reading in that. But I found that thoroughly enjoyable. And and that we probably encompass a little bit of all of them. But I thought that was spectacular. But again, that's for me and my path. So, I've created this with the idea that if anybody ever asked me what books should they read, I've had people say, well, Jim, I think it's interesting that you're into these things. If I wanted to explore it, what should I do? What should I read? And my initial thought is, oh my Lord, look at all these barriers that I had to overcome. Well, maybe everybody's got to overcome their barriers, but I felt compelled to say, here were a few, and I hope they don't block your path. I guess if it does, it does, and maybe it's the wrong path. But I'll say it again. One of them is, you can get these online, Amazon. You can get them at a Vedanta center. It's really interesting to me that these books at the Vedanta Center are generally made and printed at an ashram in India, and so some of them are so inexpensive, $5, $7. I think if a religion is charging too much, that makes them a bit of a false guru, false religion. I think you can get this one at Amazon. I can't remember what it would cost. The other one, this is the one that I think a lot of, various people, this is highly recommended, a huge bestseller, Ramakrishna and his disciples. What's fascinating about it is Ramakrishna was only 100 and some years ago. So these are direct personal accounts that happened then. It has images of Ramakrishna, images of Dakshineshwar, the great temple where he was. These things were then. Now it's not 4,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, where it can have alterations. It's right here and now, and it's written by Christopher Isherwood, who is I think he passed away 1980s, and he's written many books, fiction books. He's written, I wish I could remember the movies, but he's a screenwriter, and he also was a disciple in the Vedanta order of Ramakrishna. So here he's westernized and personalized. It's hard to read some of those old words. It is hard. So both of these books are written in Western and more modern terms, and that's why I recommend them. There's so many other books that are great, but they're a hoot. If you just want to learn about India in the 1880s, read Ramakrishna and his disciples. Fantastic. Fantastic. I believe Gandhi also was a scholar in the area or a devotee, I think, but I'm not sure about that one. But anyway, find your path, discover things. I just wanted to throw these out there. I just had this urge this morning to throw this video together. And besides, my son gave me a new something mechanical here to do these videos, so I thought I'd give it a shot and see how it works out. So if you explore these things, good luck, have fun. To me, spirituality, enlightenment, finding your path is really the purpose of our life. Yeah, we have a householder purpose too, but underlying it all is enlightenment. So there you go. Thanks.